You know the kind of boss that has multiple phases? Like, usually 3. It progresses through a couple of different things, and you gotta deal with it in different ways. Well, let's talk about a few of those. Hi folks, it's Falcon, and today on gameranx, 10 crazy bosses that have 3 forms. Starting off at number 10, Dark Souls 3's Sister Frida. Let's start this one off with some pure, uncut brutality. Many bosses in the Dark Souls series have multiple forms. Hell, practically every boss in Elden Ring has some kind of second form, but few actually have these full-blown, totally new third forms. Frida, one of the few exceptions, and very rough. Sister Frida is the final boss of the Ashes of Ariandel DLC, and at first, it seems like this one wouldn't be too difficult. The fight starts when you approach the mutated form of Father Ariandel in the secret shrine, and she appears behind you with her scythe. Her attacks are actually pretty easy to avoid, but she's got this one nasty trick where she turns invisible, jumps behind you, and attempts to get you from there. The only way to counter it is to listen for her attack and see her footprints in the snow give away her location. So that's enough for a fight, right? But that's not the end of it. Once you beat her, then Father Ariandel goes nuts and decides he wants to join in. So hey, you get to fight both of them at the same time, 2-on-1. Always fun in Souls games. Maybe you can detect the sarcasm. At least they share a health bar, so you can just focus on attacking one of them. When they die, the game pulls a final nasty trick though. They disappear in a flash of light, and you get a Titanite slab as a reward, something that only happens when a boss fight is over in the game. But then you hear a voice, and this is where you have to take on the final boss form, Black Flame Frida, which is basically her first form on steroids. To somehow make things worse, if you died in this last form, guess what? You got to do it all over again. That's probably one of my least favorite possible outcomes. It's a grueling battle of attrition, and only the craziest Souls players even bother finishing it. Sister Frida's reputation as one of the hardest bosses in the entire series is well earned. It's not hard. It's frankly, it's cruel. And number 9 is Chef Saltbaker in Cuphead. Pretty much every boss in Cuphead has at least 3 forms. Some actually go well beyond that. But if you gotta pick one, I'm gonna go with Chef Saltbaker from the Delicious Last Course DLC. This is a guy that's both incredibly tough and also awe-inspiring. Like, from a visual standpoint, the animation is not just incredible, it's kind of just unparalleled. There's something about it that's beyond most things now. For the first phase, you're taking on the chef on his cutting board. You'd think that'd mean you'd be dodging his knife, but the actual fight's more chaotic than that. Instead, you're dodging sugar cubes, sliced fruit, a really annoying little fireball guy that I don't really know what to call him, but he never goes away, and whatever else you see him chopping up in the background. It's kind of horrifying in some ways, but it's also really funny seeing all these cooking ingredients portrayed as living things, especially the giant sugar cube that looks terrified before getting smashed into little pieces. You manage to survive that onslaught and the chef grabs you, and so then you have to fight him on his hand, where he attacks with salt and pepper shakers. Instead of attacking him directly, you gotta shoot at the shakers, which then fly off and hit him in the face after you do enough damage. So I don't know if the third one I would necessarily call the most difficult, but it's by far the most weird. Anyone who's been through the rest of the fight 60 or 70 times before getting to it knows what I'm talking about. But the whole building like collapses, and you're in the salt version of End of Evangelion, for lack of a better way of putting it. And you have like the corpse of the chef in the background. He attacks with this dancing salt creature and then turns into, I guess, a tornado. It's truly insane. It's probably one of the most grotesque things in the game too, and it's most of all just incredibly good. And pretty much every boss in Cuphead is incredible and qualify for this list, but I mean, there's just so many things I'm totally blown away by in this fight. Even not even thinking about the difficulty level, but yeah, but that's a big thing too. And number 8 is Urizen from Devil May Cry 5. This one's kind of a cheat, but I think it counts. Urizen is a boss with 3 forms. You just don't fight them all at once. The first encounter is in the prologue. He's sitting on this weird, like, throne. It's hard to tell what he's really even supposed to be, and his attacks certainly don't help much. Mostly being hard to read magic attacks. The first time you fight him, you're really not supposed to win either. It's the event that kicks the whole game off, and it's not until the end of the game that you get a chance to fight him again. This time he's much more powered up. He shreds all the vines, tentacles, and reveals the demon underneath. He's still not super mobile, but at least he's walking around this time. It's a tough, pretty climactic fight, but there's one more form to go. After beating him, V merges with Urizen to finally become Virgil, who is Dante's brother and the guy everybody knew was eventually going to show up.
It's just about time to settle.
That's right. Come on.
All three fights are kind of separated, but it's the same boss, just with new forms, and they're all pretty spectacular, especially the final battle with Virgil, which is probably one of the all-time best boss fights, period. And number 7 is the Resident Evil 2 remake, William Birkin. Another Capcom game with another boss that loves to change forms. William Birkin, along with Mr. X, primary antagonist of Resident Evil 2. And if there's one thing that he loves, it is changing form. Oh wow, does he like that. In both versions of Resident Evil 2, he has no less than 5 complete form transformations, G1 through G5, each transformation more grotesque than the last on account of infecting himself with the G-Virus after being betrayed by Umbrella. His first form looks basically human. You can still make out part of his face, and he uses a pipe as a weapon. But when you encounter him again in the sewers, his face is now merged into his shoulder, and he's using a gigantic malformed claw against you. The third form, which you take on in the lab, is where he's fully become a monster with 4 arms and an almost alien appearance. Claire's the only one that takes on the 4th form. It's her final boss fight, and he's looking pretty rough, starting to look like a bloated dog or something. His final form is more of an event than a boss, per se. After beating the game with both characters, you have to fight off this final blob form on the train while escaping the city. And as far as transformations go, there's few in video games as crazy and iconic as this one. And number 6 is Sephiroth from Final Fantasy VII. When you're talking about bosses with multiple forms, can't not mention this guy. Even though the Final Fantasy series is pretty famous for multi-stage battles, if you look at a lot of them individually, not many of them have 3 forms, like Ultimecia does. Kefka of Final Fantasy VI, only 1. 3 parts of the final fight in his tower, but you're not actually fighting him. It's actually kind of rare to have a boss with 3 separate forms in this series. And back in 97, this was probably one of the most epic things of all time. This 4-stage boss fight in the center of the earth, or whatever this place is supposed to be, against one of the best bad guys of all time. For the first stage, you don't even take on Sephiroth, it's about Genova. The real fight starts with Bizarro Sephiroth, a bizarre looking thing that you can fight with multiple parties, but don't do that. It actually makes the fight much more complicated for whatever reason. So after beating him, that stuff, it seemed crazy, but it's not crazy compared to what it is now. Now you're in the sky, or something, taking on Safer Sephiroth, the one-winged angel form of Sephiroth. By far the hardest part of the fight, but still one final part to deal with after you beat this. The actual real final battle is a one-on-one duel between Cloud and Sephiroth. You can't really lose it. It's just basically a cool moment that you get to beat down the bad guy in his normal form. Kind of still an amazing boss fight, even with those PS1 graphics. This is one of those things that Part 3 of the remake, whenever that finally comes out in a decade or whatever, is going to be the most insane thing we've ever seen. And number 5, Fecto Forgo in Kirby and the Forgotten Land. You wouldn't think a game as cute as Kirby would have some kind of crazy final boss. In fact, a lot of Kirby stuff's pretty deceptive, and again, with this, you would be wrong. The final battle against this psychic alien creature called Fecto Forgo is just totally nuts. It starts with what seems like the actual final boss, Leongar, the King of the Beasts. You beat him, though, and the true bad guy reveals itself, this melted alien thing called Fecto Forgo, which attacks you by going full Resident Evil and absorbing the Beast Pack to become this giant, gross wall of flesh. So you beat that, and then you take on its true form, I guess, Fecto Elphilis, where it fights you like you're playing DMC or something. Like, this fight's friggin' crazy. Normally the fight ends there, but if you manage to unlock and beat the Ultimate Arena Challenge, you have to fight Chaos Elphilis, who's basically the same boss, but way harder. What matters most for our purposes, though, is that this is an exclusive new form where it becomes this giant orb that's incredibly damaging and powerful. Pretty much all the recent Kirby games have some boss like this, but I can't think of any others with as many forms as this guy. And number 4 is Chrono Trigger's Lavos. You can't make a list like this without mentioning Lavos. Like, this is JRPG classic territory. Like, Chrono Trigger's art, music, and story, they hold up 30 years after it originally came out, and the final boss, no exception. The whole game is about traveling through time to stop this alien creature known as Lavos from destroying the entire world. You'd think that would involve coming up with some clever plan to stop it, and yeah, I guess. Kind of. But mostly all you really do is roll up on it and beat the hell out of it. Its first form is the outer shell, the part you're probably well aware of at this point, and it attacks by taking the moves of various bosses you've already fought up to that point. It's not too difficult as long as you actually fight it at the end of the game. Beating it opens the way to the next phase, which is Lavos' true form. No pushover. But taking that down reveals the final true, for real true form of Lavos, called the Lavos Core. This is really tricky because the real boss isn't the humanoid form at the center. Killing that doesn't actually end the fight. It can actually be infinitely revived. Instead, you have to kill the little defense things next to it. It's a wild fight, honestly. At number 3 is The Legend of Zelda Twilight Princess, Ganon. There's tons of great Ganon battles throughout the whole series, but probably the best in terms of what we're talking about here is in Twilight Princess. It's a long fight. Ganon has 3 different forms, and they all test you. It's actually a 4-stage battle, kind of like Sephiroth. You don't start off fighting Ganon. Instead, you take on Zelda, who's being controlled by Ganon, and after you save her, Ganon gets pissed and transforms into Dark Beast Ganon, which is different because he's normally some kind of a pig monster, but this one's a little more beast, maybe even bull-like. Most of the time when you beat Ganon's monster form, he's done, but he's just getting started in this one. Now you have to fight him on horseback. Your main goal here is to get Zelda to shoot him with silver arrows and make him vulnerable. You beat him here, and that's when the real final battle starts against Dark Lord Ganondorf. The game ends with a straight-up sword fight, and it's probably one of the best in the series. It's tense, it's very challenging, and it's probably one of the gnarliest deaths in the entire series, too. And number 2 is Zenmus from Kingdom Hearts 2. When it comes to over-the-top endings in JRPGs, not a lot of games top Kingdom Hearts 2. Final battle against Zenmus, truly insane. Counting the main man himself, he's got 3 forms. But if you want to count that dragon ship as well, then that balloons this fight to at least 5, depending on how you want to count it. Doesn't really matter, because it still counts for this list either way. Starts with the normal form, so cool, fine. You're transported outside. You have to reach the dragon ship, which involves slashing buildings, because of course it does. The ending of this game is so over the top, you just... yeah, buildings. From there, you take on the dragon ship core. Then you go back to fighting Zenmus again. This time he's in his armored controller form, which has him lounging on a throne, like a really smug. He's so overpowered, he can't even bother to get up and fight you. That's how ridiculous it is. That doesn't stop you from beating him, of course, otherwise what would be the point? And after chasing down the dragon ship, you end the sequence by taking on his true form, which is basically his regular form on steroids. The whole ending sequence is ridiculous. And I mean that in the best possible way. Few things can match the excess of Square Enix when they're firing on all cylinders. And finally, Negaphilgaia from Wild Arms 3. Now, this is a really great PS2 JRPG. It's a classic, one of the few PS2 games you can still buy and play on the PlayStation Store as well. And while that's nice and all, you're probably wondering what qualifies it for the number 1 spot on this list, right? Here's the thing. This boss doesn't have 3 forms, 4, 5, no, not even 6. There are 10 forms to this boss. And we're not talking like Persona 3 final boss here where there's different phases. No, this boss has 10 entirely different forms that it changes into. And apparently, its many forms are meant to be a representation of its concept of evolution, at least according to the Wild Arms wiki. There's no attribution, but whatever. That makes about as much sense as anything else. By the time you get to this point, Wild Arms 3 is just way off the rails. As somebody who spent a lot of time with RPGs from that era, I can't emphasize how Wild Arms 3 gets by this time. And it's a final boss with 10 forms. It's just totally insane. None of these things are particularly impressive on their own, but there is 10 of them in a row. I still don't really know what's supposed to be happening here, but if you're looking for crazy boss forms, you can't go much further than this. At least nobody has. And that's all for today. Leave us a comment. Let us know what you think. If you like this video, click like. If you're not subscribed, now's a great time to do so. We upload brand new videos every day of the week. Best way to see them first is, of course, a subscription, so click subscribe. Don't forget to enable notifications, and as always, we thank you very much for watching this video. I'm Falcon. You can follow me on Twitter at Falcon the Hero. We'll see you next time right here on Gameranx.